In the vast kingdom of computing, random access memory, RAM is the holy grail. It is the workspace where the CPU keeps everything it needs right now. If the hard drive is a dusty library in the basement, RAM is the desk right in front of you. But not all desks are created equal. First, let's meet SRAM, or static random access memory. The word static sounds slow, doesn't it? In reality, it is the most frantic, high-octane component in your system. It is called static because as long as you provide it with the electricity, it holds onto its data like a vice. It doesn't need to be reminded of what it's holding. It is certain. It is resolute. Then, we have the younger, more crowded sibling, DRAM, or dynamic random access memory. If SRAM is a stone carving, DRAM is a message written in the sand at low tide. The word dynamic refers to its constant state of flux. DRAM is forgetful. By its very nature, it leaks. If you do refresh, it is essentially shouting the data back at it thousands of times every second. The information simply evaporates. This brings us to the central mystery. Why on earth would we entrust our most important data to a dynamic memory that forgets everything every few milliseconds? The answer lies in the beautiful, brutal trade-offs of engineering. To understand why these two coexist, we have to look at the memory hierarchy. Imagine you are a world-class chef. You need salt. You have a small pinch bowl of salt right next to your stove. This is SRAM. You also have a 50-pound bag of salt in the pantry. This is DRAM. SRAM is cache memory. It sits directly on the CPU chip or very close to it. It is insanely fast, capable of matching the blistering heartbeat of a modern processor. But it is also incredibly expensive and bulky in terms of physical space on the silicon. You can't have much of it. If your computer relied solely on SRAM for everything, your laptop would cost $20,000 and be the size of a refrigerator. DRAM is main memory, the sticks of RAM you buy at the store. It is the middle ground. It's slower than SRAM but vastly faster than your SSD or hard drive. Crucially, it is dense. You can pack billions of bits of DRAM into a space the size of a fingernail. It provides the capacity we need to run Windows, Chrome, and a high-end game all at once, at a price that doesn't require a second mortgage. But why the difference? Why is one a sprinter and the other a warehouse worker? To find out, we have to look at the DNA of the memory cell itself. Let's zoom in on a single bit of DRAM. It is a masterpiece of minimalism. A DRAM cell consists of just two things, one transistor and one capacitor. Engineers call this the 1T1C design. Think of the capacitor as a tiny bucket. If the bucket is full of electrons, it represents a 1. If it's empty, it represents a 0. The transistor acts as a gatekeeper, a simple switch that opens to let the electrons in or out. This simplicity is DRAM's greatest strength. Because the cell is so small, you can fit billions of them on a single chip. This is why you can have 16 gigabytes or 32 gigabytes of RAM in a thin smartphone. But this strength is also a fatal flaw. Capacitors are imperfect. They leak. Imagine that tiny bucket of electrons has a microscopic hole in the bottom. From the moment you fill it, write a 1. The electrons begin to seep away into the surrounding silicon. If you wait too long, just a few milliseconds, the bucket will be empty, and your 1 will have turned into a 0. Your data is gone. This is why DRAM must be dynamic. The computer must constantly perform a refresh cycle. It reads the value of the bucket, and if it sees it's starting to empty, it pumps it back full of electrons. This happens thousands of times a second. It is like a juggler who has to keep hitting a spinning plate to keep it from falling. This constant maintenance consumes power and creates latency. The CPU sometimes has to wait because the DRAM is busy refreshing itself. Reading from DRAM is an even more dramatic affair. When the CPU wants to know what's in that capacitor, it opens the transistor gate. But here's the problem. To measure the charge in that tiny bucket, the electrons have to flow out onto a wire called the bit line. The act of reading the data empties the bucket. This is what engineers call a destructive read. Imagine reading a page in a book, and as your eyes pass over the words, the ink disappears. To solve this, every time DRAM is read, the hardware must immediately write the data back into the cell. To make this faster, DRAM uses a clever trick called precharging. Instead of waiting to see if a signal is a 1 or 0 from a standing start, the system pre-fills the bit lines to a halfway voltage. It's like a judge at a race leaning in to hear a whisper. By being at a neutral middle ground, The sense amplifier can detect a tiny nudge in voltage much faster than it could detect a full surge. Now let's look at the elite. SRAM does not use capacitors. It doesn't use buckets that leak. Instead, it uses a complex web of transistors, usually 6 of them, the 6T cell. The heart of a SRAM cell is a pair of cross-coupled inverters. Imagine 2 people sitting across from each other. If person A shouts 1, person B hears it and shouts 1 back. This reinforces person A, who continues to shout 1. They are locked in a stable loop. As long as the power is on, they will never stop shouting that 1 at each other. They don't need a refresh, they don't leak. Because there is no bucket to fill or empty, SRAM is incredibly fast. There is no waiting for charge to build up. The moment you open the access transistors, the state of the cell is immediately available. However, look at the math. DRAM, 1 transistor plus 1 capacitor. SRAM, 6 transistors. SRAM is physically 6 times larger or more than DRAM for the same amount of data. This is why your CPU might have 16 gigabytes of DRAM main memory, but only 16 megabytes of SRAM L3 cache. SRAM is the high-rent penthouse of the computer. It's beautiful and fast, but space is limited and it costs a fortune. Engineering is never finished. Sometimes designers try to find a middle ground. They created a 4-transistor, 4T SRAM cell. By replacing 2 of the transistors with resistive loads, they made the cell smaller. But there's no free lunch in physics. The 4T design is smaller, but it suffers from static power dissipation. It leaks electricity even when it's just sitting there doing nothing. In our modern world of battery-powered phones and green data centers, this vampire power is a deal-breaker. This is why the 6T SRAM remains the king of high-performance computing. It's the most efficient way to be fast and stable, even if it takes up more room on the silicon. How does the SRAM actually talk? It uses differential bit lines. Instead of 1 wire, it uses 2. The bit line and the bit line bar, the opposite. When the cell is read, 1 wire goes slightly high and the other goes slightly low. By looking at the difference between 2 wires rather than the absolute voltage of 1, the system can ignore noise and interference. It's like 2 people confirming a story if they both agree, it's the truth. This is why SRAM can operate at the multi-gigahertz speeds required by modern processors. Writing to SRAM is just as brutal. To change a 1 to a 0, the system simply overpowers the cross-coupled inverters. It's like a third person walking into that shouting match and screaming 0, so loud that the other 2 are forced to change their tune. Once they change, they lock into that new state instantly. So we come to the end of our structural journey. We have seen that. SRAM is the speed king. It is built from a fortress of transistors, requires no refresh, but is bulky and expensive. It is the cache that keeps the CPU fed. DRAM is the capacity king. It is built from tiny leaky buckets. It is slow and forgetful, requiring constant refreshing. But its incredible density allows us to have the massive memory needed for modern software. Without DRAM, computers would be incredibly small-minded. Without SRAM, computers would be incredibly slow. They are the fast and slow thinking of the machine, a perfect partnership born of architectural necessity. Understanding the difference between SRAM and DRAM isn't just for engineers. It changes how you look at technology. When you see a cache specification on a new processor, like AMD's 3DV cache, you now know that they are literally stacking more of that expensive 6-transistor fast memory on top of the chip to reduce the time the CPU spends waiting on the leaky buckets of DRAM. When buying technology, don't just look at the total RAM, DRAM. If you are a gamer or a video editor, look at the CPU cache, SRAM. A processor with a larger cache can often outperform one with a slightly higher clock speed because it doesn't have to leave the fast lane as often. Also, remember that dynamic memory is why your computer uses more battery when you have 100 tabs open. Those billions of capacitors are being refreshed thousands of times a second, drawing power even if you aren't looking at them. Now I want to hear from you. This microscopic world is complex, but it mirrors our own lives in many ways. If you had to choose a memory style for your own brain, would you rather be like SRAM, fast, stable, but you can only remember a few things, or DRM, you can remember everything, but you have to constantly study to keep from forgetting? I wish you all great health, a sharp memory of the SRAM variety. and a wonderful day ahead. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the silicon soul of your computer, please hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. Don't let your knowledge leak away. Refresh your brain by joining our community. See you in the next one.